Welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast. So excited you are here. Thanks so much for tuning in. Ryan and I back at it.
Yes.
Excited as ever. This is kind of our first official podcast. I hope that you tuned in last week, I guess, to do kind of the intro to the Dafaz. I say it
That's
wrong
pronounced
every time.
perfectly correctly.
You know what was funny? After that podcast, I looked at the way that I had spelled your name in my phone. And I was embarrassed.
Was it D-A-F-O-E?
I don't want to talk about it, but it could have been. Don't tell your wife. So, so it was one of those, like, I learned. I hope those that were watching learned too. We had, I think, like 6 or 7 likes and like 50 views, so I know some people checked it out.
40 of those were my mom. Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
1 or 2 of them was definitely my family as well. But that's all right. That's okay. But today we're going to get kind of back into our normal routine. We're going to kind of jump into a podcast we've done before. It's a fun way to kind of introduce some concepts, I think, inside our own hearts, to kind of get back to Bible stuff. You know, the whole purpose of this podcast is kind of just to love to learn and love doing it. So I know for many of the subjects and things we do, some of them are silly, some of them are a little less focused. Today is going to be one of those just off the cuff, grabbing a daily Bible verse from a website or from an app and just going like, what is this about? So I know you and I looked up a couple before, but we didn't really go deep.
Yeah.
A lot of people, all right, not a lot. Most people use the Bible app, right? Yeah. I mean, it's the Life Church app. It's
the YouVersion one.
Yes, the YouVersion one. And that verse for today is Colossians 3:23 through 24.
Yeah.
And that is a really neat verse. But if you're using a desktop and you're looking up Bible stuff, a lot of people use Bible Gateway.
Yeah.
Which I think was Deuteronomy 7 through 9 or something. And so we looked at both very briefly. Both of them are amazing verses that you could dive in. I think let's stick with the New Testament. And if we get through the Colossians one, maybe we'll go back to the Deuteronomy. So if you're watching or listening along, I highly encourage you to jump on your Bible app or pull open a real Bible. Whoop, and to run over to Colossians. Sound like a... Run on over. Come on down. To Colossians 3:23 through 24. Ryan, will you read that for me? What are you reading out of, though?
I'm reading out of everyone's favorite NIV, not contested at all.
Oh,
the NIV 2011.
Oh, sounds like 1984. I'm so proud. Oh, okay.
Nope.
No, all right. Keep going. King James.
Dost thou know? Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving.
Okay. So, one of the first things I do, because this is like 101 stuff, we're trying to learn, and if you're paying attention, you're watching right now, this is one of those, like, maybe you could try this on your own. We've talked a lot about this, right? Context. Who is the audience? Who's writing it? Who are they writing it to? What are the verses that are surrounding it? You know, all those types of questions that come into a really important. But before we even get to any of that, I like to see if there's any like footnotes. Do you have any footnotes in yours? Your Bible's kind of teeny. I'm trying to look. I don't think there's any footnotes in mine.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Okay,
so that's just kind of a first, whatever. This is not a reference Bible, so it doesn't have like the middle where it might give like parallel verses or like some other things. So that might be in your Bible as well. So you might be able to pull over and like see, oh, there's a couple, parallel verses to that. Let's go. This is the best thing to do, right? The headers are added in, but they are helpful. What's the headers before and after this verse?
So before this one is instructions for Christian households. So there's something like that here. There's one in Ephesians. It's the wives, submit yourself to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Do not be harsh with them. Children, do this.
Obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will be discouraged.
Yeah.
I remember the old NIV was like, don't annoy them, I think was
Yeah.
like the term.
Yeah.
It's like, what does that mean? And now that I have kids, I'm like, oh, I get it.
That's definitely the millennial interpretation. Get out of my room.
Slaves, obey your masters in everything. Oh my gosh, that would just be horrible. Do it as not your eyes, as your own, to carry their favor, but with serenity of heart and reverence for the Lord. So that would be incredibly tough to read. Out of all of those, I think that would be the one that I'm sure, person that was in slavery, which would be very different, I think, in context. Most of the time, slavery was a debt that was not able to be paid, that then was physically earned back to kind of black. Right?
Yeah, it was like trying to dine and dash at a restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
and then you got to go do the dishes, but you got to do the dishes and live there and work there for years.
Yes, and most of the time it was a debt that was occurred normally. Sometimes it was land that was borrowed that was not enough harvest was brought in. Sometimes it was family debt, that kind of built up that they were trying to clear their name. And sometimes it was just absolutely horrible circumstances that were taken advantage of, and people were absolutely brought into
being a prisoner of war.
Yes, exactly, and having people that were of different, heritage, different nationalities for sure.
Yeah,
and not all those, so some of those circumstances, this verse is easy context, right? Like work out your burden or work out your balance. But some of them are totally not okay. Like you're like, I didn't do anything to deserve this. Just nearly the color of my skin or where I came from has caused me to be in this position. And he's like, everything you do, just working. Gosh, it would be tough. So why that's important though is because the verses that I just read with reverence to the Lord from slavery is the last verse before our verse. That's verse 22.
Yeah.
So that's kind of curious to me that like the whatever you do, work at it with all your heart is like right next to that verse where it's like a slave is supposed to have this heart of sincerity and reverence to God as they finish their work. I don't know. I find that really, like, you can tell that Paul, and how do we know Paul wrote this?
Well, let's look all the way back to the beginning of the book. Paul, that's the first word.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. I mean, I guess we don't have to guess if he signs the beginning of the book. But that's a really important thing, and not all of them do say that that way. But Paul, an apostle of Christ. And who's he writing it to?
I had flipped back over.
It's in verse 2. To God's holy people in Colossae.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so we know who's writing it, we know who it's written to, and obviously the context of that flows through this whole book, but specifically to this section, you can see him kind of dividing out the crowd.
Yeah.
Dividing out the people that he's talking to, knowing probably names and specific families of all these situations. Here he goes. That really starts to help. Now, before we get straight to that, I find it curious that we get the other side of slavery after the section that we're in, right? So anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. And then that's verse 25 right after our section. But then chapter 4 starts with masters.
Yeah.
So in my mind, here's where I start to go, is the context of this verse, it seems like it's a list, and our verse is found inside the context of that slavery bullet point.
Yeah.
Inside this section of instructions. Now, I'm not saying it can't be taken into further context, but it seems like it's kind of his further evaluation or further explanation of this context of working towards what Jesus wants or what Christ wants in reverence, rather than working with other motives. And he's using the slavery thing as like a great, kind of inlet. Inuit? That's a not an Inuit.
Nope.
An inlet.
Sure. That's less dangerous.
an inlet to talking about this subject, which I think is spectacular. You can tell he almost like, I'm sure it was planned to a degree, but it's almost like and furthermore, let me explain this. Because if the verse afterwards says, "Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know you also have a master in heaven."
Yeah.
You can tell he doesn't leave them off the list. Now, if I think of the context of this verse in that kind of setting, where I have no say in my daily routine, I have no say in possessions or what I hold, I have no say even in my own freedom of choices, and yet I still have to work. How does this verse start to take shape? Does it start to change in your mind?
Yeah, it does. I haven't looked up biblical slavery in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But I assume that the working you're working to pay off your debt.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a lot of them, it might be, think about like Jacob in the Old Testament, working 7 years in his future father-in-law's field to marry Rachel.
Yeah, but what's her older sister?
Leah.
Leah, yep.
Yeah. And then, so his whole goal as he's working is, I'm doing all this work so I can marry Rachel and then move out. Mm-hmm. And then his father tricks him and he's like, ha, you married Leah,
yep.
Which is a terrible trick. Do not do that. Don't try that at home. But his whole goal for the next 7 years is, I need to keep working so I can marry Rachel also. And for some slaves, some worldly stuff, it might be, I'm just working to pay off my debt to get my freedom. Mm-hmm. But what Paul is doing through all of these examples is pulling their perspective back up.
Yeah.
You're working, you think you're working for your freedom in your own material life.
Yes.
But don't you know that your rewards are actually in heaven?
That is exactly where I feel like, and if we went back further and we looked, at the section even before these instructions, he gives us the motivation that you're talking about. If you go back to the start of chapter 3, it literally gives the heading. I mean, it's not a perfect, the headings have been added in as injunctions. They're not always the greatest things to proper or full context, but they are helpful most of the times to at least start a conversation. Yeah. And this is this living as those made alive in Christ.
Yeah.
There's a part of this section that, if you know this, since you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. That's the first verse of chapter 3.
And then it's all how to do that. And so it goes into general context. The after the first verse or two of chapter 3, it's throw off all these things, like our detox series. Mm-hmm. Unchain yourself from these things. Yep. Don't burden yourself down with these worldly, ungodly things like selfishness and other sins and whatever. But then put on these other things. Do these other things. Yep. And then it gets into the relational one.
And that's
telling everybody do all these things.
And that's the fruits of the Spirit, right? Yeah. They laid out in here.
Yeah.
And I think that's verse 12, right, of chapter 3. Dearly beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentle patience, bear with one another, forgive one another, grievances, You're exactly right. Like there's these beautiful sections of throwing off and putting on the right things, or detoxing the wrong things, and filling yourself up with the right things. I think the beautiful part of this piece of kind of instruction is that it's like a sermon, right? Yeah. Like he gets to the end of the chapter and it gets really specific. Yeah. Like he's
writing this to them, but in his writing he's like, "Hey you, Judy.
Yes.
I see you. I know exactly what you're doing."
Exactly. I mean,
you need to stop frustrating your kids.
It feels like he knows what he needs to say to make sure they get it. And the section that he speaks to the longest is the slaves.
Yeah.
I find that curious, and I don't, like you, I haven't done, this is just off the cuff. I mean, we just read this, we haven't looked at commentaries, we haven't read, but I think you can start to, my first place to go would go, how many slaves were in Colossae? Was the first church in Colossae more of the low-income, broken people? That would make sense to me if that's who was coming to this church for the first, and if that's who his audience is, you can see that that's the sticking point where he's kind of like, husbands, wives, children, do this, but then the slaves, and you can tell he's kind of like, he's had to lean in a little bit. Yeah. To be like, I know this doesn't make sense right now, but it actually is for everybody, but I know in your context, it feels really raw. Yeah. It feels really intense. But it's actually for everybody. Because if I read it like that, and in sincere reverence of heart and reverence to the Lord is the verse right before. That's how it concludes. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. As working for the Lord, not for human masters. since you know that you will receive an inheritance for the Lord. As a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving.
Yeah.
My mind there, it's intensely clear. He is telling them, whether you own something on land or own something in the city, your name, your inheritance is going to be secure.
Yeah.
You have a promise to be invited into the family of God. You are not an outsider working for the master.
Yeah.
You are invited in, and you're in this. And I think the beauty of the context of that is he's kind of encouraging them, but also reminding everyone else, this is how it is for everybody, right? And when I first read that, I just didn't have slavery and working, I read that human masters, I read like my boss, not like a master, you know, like I really don't think of it in the context of like full on, like 100% daily, can't leave the farm, master. I don't know. The power of that seems to be a lot more radical than I thought. I think I thought of it more of like hey, keep your eyes on Jesus, and this is actually more of a like, I know this daily work is really hard and it has no financial gain for you, no real help for your future. It's just you completing the tasks that have been told to you by the person that's in charge of you. Yeah,
like you feel stuck. You're at the bottom of the food chain and there's no hope to get up. But in this, he's saying that you're looking at the wrong food chain. And in actuality, I'm spending the most time on you. Mm-hmm. And in that way, kind of honoring you the most.
Yep.
And
his promise that Christ is offering is to them.
Yeah. What really stuck out to me is it's in the middle of talking to slaves, and it said, since you know that you will receive an inheritance, which is you are a high status member of this family kind of thing. Yep. Even like the second-born son didn't receive nearly as much as the first, but you will receive an inheritance means you're a part of the family.
Yep. And that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's so fun whenever we dive into these verses, it doesn't matter if it takes us 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I think there's always hidden gems in the context, right?
Yeah.
There's always hidden gems because in my mind, the Bible, the more you research it, the more you look into it, it may provide a little bit more questions at times. But if you can get to the context of the audience and who's writing, and not all letters, not all epistles are even this clear, but this is an incredible moment where I feel like I walked into this verse thinking I knew what Paul was talking about. I'd read this 1,000 times. Yeah. And then the moment we read that slaves was the verse before, I went, maybe I quite didn't. Maybe I didn't quite get what it was talking about. And I can feel the intensity because there's like this part of me that wants at times my work right now to mean something.
Yeah.
And the reward of it to be a raise, or the reward of it to be accolades, or the reward of it to be something that the people around me at least see its value.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you, I know a number of people that's not where they're currently at in their professional life, where they don't get accolades, they're not getting raises, or they don't even have, really a future in their job. And it really does take the wind out of your sails. Yeah. And I could see how maybe it's not exactly obviously the same as slavery, but this would be an encouraging verse to them to say, like, whatever you do, it's like, it doesn't have to be this deeply impactful, deeply moving, deeply applauded position to receive an inheritance. It's just being faithful in your daily routines, being faithful in the way that you live out your each day with the work that's put in front of you and pursuing that. I don't know. I think there's a part of an American in me that kind of immediately goes, can that really be true? Because I feel like you kind of have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do more, to kind of earn that. And it's precisely the opposite thing of what's being taught here, I think, by Paul.
Yeah.
Kind of cool. Any thoughts? Got a concluding things? I don't know. We beat this verse to death yet?
We figured it out. 100%.
100%. Nothing else to learn here.
I know the slave's specific name, and it's on the next episode. I was going to say, it's in the middle of the slavery passage, but it says, whatever you do, and work at it. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy to see do and work as vocation, as what am I hired to do? What am I? But it just got off of family relationships, and it just got out of like where your mindset is and all these different things. So don't let it just be do or just be work.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely hitting that because it's in the slavery part. It's saying whatever you do, how you do your job, how you think through your day, how you see people, what your first impression, first reaction is to people when you see them. Do you see what their job is? Do you see if they're white collar or blue collar? Do you see what car they drive? Or do you see that's a person made in the image of God with a broken story?
Yep, just like me.
Yeah.
I with all your heart. I mean, that is like a great, whatever you do, work for the Lord. You could leave out that with all your heart and the verse would still make sense. But when you put that with all your heart in there, I think it starts to get to the root of what Paul is like pounding in all his letters, right? Where he's like, your heart is your posture. Your heart is your thought life. Your heart is your soul. Like it's the deeper part of you that is maybe not showing in your face at the moment or showing in the level of work, but maybe it's something deep inside of you that you know is bitter or angry or depressed or broken that you need to work on letting God have that too. In the midst of those thought processes. I love that. I love that pull out. I think that's a great little nugget there to kind of pull out and to make people look at a little bit, because I think there's several things that our context in our world, we blow through those and kind of go like, I got that figured out, like the rich young ruler. And then it's like, okay. I know you've done the work, but like, how's your heart? You know, and then it's like, oh, I don't like talking about that. Go home and I don't have to think about it, you know. But your heart is the thing that, like David, Saul, right? That's what God looks at. That's what he cares about the most.
That's what he spent the entire chapter talking about.
Yes.
Until that part.
He's fighting for the heart all this chapter, you know, saying throw off this thing because it hurts your heart, throw off this thing because it distracts your mind and your heart.
Put on this thing because it helps your heart.
Yep. And then at the end, it's like, do.
And also do some work.
Exactly.
and do all those things that we just mentioned.
With that heart.
Yeah.
Take it along for the ride. Well, this has been fun. We'll do these again. I think these are always a little intimidating because we start out with like one thing and you're like, all right, here we go. What are we doing? And like all our Bible professors will be like, how dare you? But I think it's really neat that this could have been a daily devotional for someone. They just take the verse, they take it, they try to figure it out humbly. They try to figure it out, you know, with the context of what they know, and then they try to apply it in an intentional way. And if you walked away from today going like, with all my heart, whatever I do today, I'm going to try to do it as if I'm doing it for Jesus. That was what Paul was trying to teach. And if your heart is far from that, or if your work is not in tune with that, Paul would say, throw off some things, put on some different things, and keep going. And no matter if you're the master or the slave, husband, wife, child, we all have work to do. We have a reward that's waiting if we choose to surrender to Jesus. So. Well, this has been fun. I'm sure we'll do one again. Make sure if you are still tracking with us, click the subscribe button, hit the like button. It helps other people see the content. It helps other people recognize that this is going on. I know that we're always looking for suggestions in the comments or looking for things that maybe we would have missed. If you notice something in what we talked about, put it in the comments. But other than that, Ryan, do you have anything else you want to add? No? Then they should have a great and glorious day in the Lord.
They should.
See you later.